I'm going to call this meeting to order. Let's proceed with a roll call vote.
Weber,
Here.
Nystrom,
Here.
with a roll call vote.
I'm sorry, roll
Teven?
call and attendance.
Here.
Pritchard,
Here.
Melhouse.
Here.
Okay.
Okay. We've got only two items on the agenda. First is the return to learn plan. Dr. Menard, are you on here someplace? I've got, okay. Got too many pages of screens to go through here. There you are.
Yep.
Okay, I'll let you start with this.
Yeah, the return to learn plan is the development at this point of our on-site plan and our off-site plan. If we have school with everybody on-site and if we have school with everybody off-site, the next development of that process is a hybrid plan, which will be if some kids can be in school and some kids can't, however that might work itself out. There's lots of scenarios there that might come into play. But what the board needs to do tonight is approve the assurances that the Department of Education has asked us to approve that are related to the return to learn plan. And so it's not really approving our plan, it's approving the assurances. The plan itself is going to continue to grow and develop and move and adjust. And there are some things in that plan that the board would need to consider either this time or at a later date, because there's some costly, a couple of costly items that we may need to look at. So what you're looking at is a plan that is developing daily. It's changing and modifying. The Department of Education put out guidance on last Thursday, which was very general in nature. They announced today that they're going to put out more guidance. So our plan will definitely change. At the same time, we need to update with some hybrid options and looking at those types of options. So the Return to Learn plan is a living, breathing document that is working and acting and changing daily as we learn more and prepare for the start of the 2020-21 school year. But we do need to receive approval from the board on the assurances that I had previously sent out to you related to the Return to Learn plan. And I can submit that tomorrow so that we have met those requirements. And then we'll continue to work on modifying and adapting the Return to Learn plan as we work toward the start of the next school year.
And I asked before we approve the assurances, which I don't see any problem with, but can I ask, now that the DE has given their guidance, what is Boone thinking about regarding masks?
Well, no, that's a great question. And I've had a lot of discussion with a lot of different people about it. And we really have about a month and a half to make that decision and see where things are at on one hand. On the other hand, I know some districts put out there initially that they were going to require masks and got a lot of negative feedback. On the other hand, I think that there's some validity to that requirement if we continue to see concerns health-wise. What we have in the plan is that will be optional. Students can wear them, teachers can wear them. We are purchasing a mask that will allow us, so we have enough for our staff to wear. We've actually, I think we're purchasing 1,000 and we've got about 350 staff members. So we should be in good shape there, but we haven't made a final determination on requiring it one way or the other. One of the things that is going to happen as a result of this Return to Learn plan is there are surveys that the DE is recommending that we put out, along with some information we may want to ask along with that. And those surveys will ask questions like, are you planning on having your child return to school? What are your concerns? And we hope to get more feedback on that, because there's some strong validity for requiring masks, and yet we know what do you do if a parent says, I'm not going to require my child to wear a mask? Do you not allow them to come to school? Those are some pretty heavy decisions that have to be made.
I've also heard from parents that say they'd like to know as soon as possible, because if we're not allowing masks or not requiring masks, they're not sending their kids back. So,
Right.
you know, they want to make other changes. So, you know, I'm hoping that we do require it, considering I am babysitting the child of a person who would be in the school district
Sure.
with my
Could
husband.
I make
having
a statement here?
stuff. I would hope we do it. Yeah.
I believe the Boone County Board of Health and their chairperson is probably gonna make it strongly recommended, if not mandatory, that all kids in the county and all faculty wear masks anytime in the school district. This topic was discussed this noon with all the primary care providers here in Boone County at our Monday luncheon. And there was uniform agreement that all the physicians were in favor of the mandatory use of masks for all students and for all staff, because all the scientific literature, not the political literature, but the scientific literature would indicate that in the next phase of this disease, to keep it under control, it is extremely important that you wear masks at all times when you're out in the public, anytime you're closer than 6 feet, even when you are 6 feet sometimes. You're not wearing the mask to protect yourself. You're wearing the mask to protect your neighbors and the person sitting 3 feet away from you. Because that mask is going to prevent you from spreading the disease in the 3 to 4 days before you become symptomatic. And so all the national healthcare experts are recommending masking. The American Academy of Pediatrics just put out some recommendations today, and they're strongly encouraging us to get back all the kids into the school buildings this fall. I have not had a chance to read the details on them, and I will before our next meeting. But as chairman of the Board of Health, I would strongly recommend that the school take a stand on this. You know, kids used to say, well, the kids, they won't wear seatbelts on buses. But we put the seatbelts on our buses, and we're having very good cooperation, even with the little kids, because everyone, when they get on a vehicle to ride in the car, they put their seatbelts on. So they do the same thing for the buses. I don't think it's going to be a little bit of a problem for some of our kindergartners and some of our younger elementary kids and probably some of our special ed students. But I think the vast majority, it is not going to be a huge issue, especially when everyone else is wearing them. So that's my statement as the public health director for the county.
Brian, excuse me, this is Pam.
Hmm.
I have a couple of questions about the assurances. I think Brad's answered them. Section 2, question 2, does the district, non-public, etc., have a plan to offer educational services through a hybrid model for the 2020-21 school year? You put no, because we don't have it today, isn't that right?
That's right, Pam. We don't have it today, but we can go in throughout the summer and change and update this plan. So once a hybrid model is in place, we can go in and mark that as yes. We're not required to have a hybrid plan. We're required to have an on-site plan or a hybrid plan.
I
So-
understand
Yep.
that.
Yep.
I just want to make sure, because a lot of the feedback that I've been getting and that I've been reading in Iowa is probably leaning toward hybrid plans. So,
Mhm.
yeah. And then I had a question on page 7, where you start the discussion about, have you identified a health and safety team responsible for ensuring there are adequate resources to support mitigation efforts? And then, have you conducted a mitigation inventory survey? And there were some more with that health group. You've got yeses for those.
Yes.
And I just wondered if I'd missed something, if I missed the list, or who
No,
those
when we,
people are?
when we did the, when we developed the plan, under each of the areas, we had teams looking at that.
Okay,
Under
so I
health
can
and
look at that
safety-
team.
Yeah,
Okay,
under health and safety, we had a team.
okay, I've seen it, yeah.
Mhm.
I'm just checking myself out.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
important to think of with the mass aspect. I know I know there's no right answer with all of this. I mean, I know that we're going to have some parents that are hysterical if we don't have mass. I know that we're going to have some parents hysterical if we do have mass. And so we as an administrative team, as a board, like we need to, well, the administrative team needs to make the decision what's going to be. And if that's handed down from the local health, and that's what we need to do. Like when the last church I was at, when, you know, we followed the CDC guidelines and the local officers, and we just fell on that and said, like, this is the recommendations of the CDC and the local health people. And so this is the recommendation, so we're going to follow it. And so then we as board members need to support that. And when we get that pushback and when we get the people screaming at us, like, we just need to say, like, this is why and this is what we're doing it because of. And encourage parents, like, yeah, my kids don't love the mass. They don't wear it great, but if you start now, if we all start with our kids right now through the summer, little bits like this, they're gonna be more prepared for it when the school days come. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
I think the other thing that the physicians were talking about, and something I look at too, is that when you talk about locally, Iowa State University is telling their students that they want to come to classes, and all the professors who want to give instructors, they're telling all of them to wear masks. So there is some local precedence here. Des Moines Public Schools is also recommending everyone wear masks. Ankeny has not made that decision yet. So I know it's not, either way you go, it's not going to be popular. But I guess I'm looking more at the scientific evidence than I am the political evidence at this time.
Yeah, Brian, when you look at the return to learn plan, a lot of it talks about following the CDC guidelines, the Department of Education guidelines. So if the Boone County Department of Public Health comes out with that recommendation, it helps us, gives us support in making that decision, because not only is it in the school, but it's the strength of the public health department in the county and those medical professionals that know and understand this much better than we as educators do.
Yes, I understand that. Board of Health will be meeting next month. I want to say it's the third Monday of the month, so it'll be a week after our next board meeting, but I'm sure that will be on the agenda. I've got a meeting with the emergency management jurisdictional, or the emergency management team, crisis team for COVID on Wednesday, and we'll be talking about it at that meeting too.
So why did they give guidance that went against that? Why did they give us guidance that said not, that they weren't recommending that?
I think it was at a state level. The state level didn't want to make a commitment. And I'm afraid it was because of political purposes, because they were afraid they would offend some of their constituents and their supporters by making it mandatory, which is very sad and unfortunate. If you look, Iowa is one of only 4 states in the country that does not have any rules or recommendation on masks at all. The other 3 states are Wisconsin, South Dakota, and Montana. All the other 46 states have some rules on masks, be it out in public, whatever. There are some sort of rules. They're at various levels. So unfortunately, I'm afraid this has become a politicized issue, which is sad. A lot of the recommendations for the COVID in general have become very politicized.
You have to
Yeah,
realize also the director of the Department of Ed is a political appointee from the governor. They appoint them directly. It's not a job interview to talk I mean, they do interview, does interview a couple, but it's the governor who hires the director. So he has to follow the rules or the guidance of the governor. So it is very, very political.
And the
My-
same thing goes for Department of Health, Public Health.
Yeah, and I would like to bring up a point at this time because I think that we have the ability to have a very creative hybrid plan. I think you can deal with, a lot of situations, people that want to wear masks and teachers that definitely do, and people that don't want to wear them and maybe staff that don't want to. We're going to have to get pretty creative. My big concern is when you start losing enrollment, possibly, because you're not offering opportunities and choices, then we really get into financial things. How many kids do you want enrolling in homeschool this fall just because parents believe it is safer? I don't have answers to those questions, but there's a new Facebook page out there that started up about 5 days ago by teachers, and in 2 days they had 6,000 members, and this morning they had 10,000 members. And you go through that and you read a lot of questions, and there are people there who aren't teachers, and there are people there who don't agree with each other. But there are lots of postings about what to do next. And our enrollment numbers should be okay, and they should be good, and we should continue to be pretty financially sound. I would not want to lose that. And I think we just need to be creative and offer choices and opportunities. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah. I would agree that we have to have alternatives. I think we're probably going to have to have a hybrid model where there might be an online version, a totally online version, and then a in-person version. And then we might have to have something in between, depending upon if we get a local outbreak or not. I'm going to be interested to read the report from the American Academy of Pediatrics. We're talking about this tonight, but everything's changing so fast. We knew about this for a month, but yet the State Department of Education and Public Health, they came out last Thursday, 4.5 days ago, were their latest guidance. At the same time, we were getting this initial report from Dr. Menard and our faculty. So that's how fast things are changing. And what we're approving tonight is probably not going to look anything like what we see starting August 23rd. I even made that statement on the radio last Friday morning. It's when I was talking to KWVG about the COVID crisis in general. And I think we're just having to make this an evolving process. When I turned on my email tonight, I got an email from Mr. Collins about some updates we're going to have to be doing starting July 1st for our summer athletic program that we're going to have to put in place. That 3 weeks ago we didn't know what they were, and now we're finding them out 2 days before we're ready to start. So this is a very much moving target. I appreciate all of our administration has done so far, and I think there's going to be a lot more for them to do. We're going to be talking about this in 2 weeks' time at our next board meeting. I expect us to be making some changes at that time, and probably at our August board meeting there'll be more changes. Other comments?
I saw on the news tonight that they said there was going to be further guidance for special ed after the second week in July. So that's even several weeks out, getting closer back to school that may not match up with the plans that you're creating. So it's just going to continue to change.
And Scott, we have extended school year for special education
Yeah.
starting, I believe it's July 20th.
Yeah,
And
July
so we're
20th.
trying to prepare for that now, and yet there'll be additional guidance coming out on July 15th. So that may adjust things with the extended school year 5 days before we're actually supposed to start. So, Well, what we're really looking for tonight is just approval of the assurances so that I can submit that tomorrow and make sure that we have met the requirements of the Department of Education in meeting the assurances built within the plan.
Do I hear a motion there someplace?
I would move to accept the assurances for the Return to Learn plan.
Okay, it has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mrs. Stevens, seconded by Dr. Nystrom to approve the preliminary report to the state. Is there any questions?
Brian, we have some chats. I wonder if anybody has questions out there.
Okay.
No,
No?
there are people that were having trouble getting in and getting back out.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing on YouTube.
Oh,
Okay.
I think one of the chat ones was one of my staff members that thought she somehow got into the wrong meeting and didn't think she was supposed to be here.
Okay. Okay. Hearing no further discussion. This is just a simple vote. All those in favor say aye.
I,
Opposed, nay. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your discussion on this topic. I look forward to further discussions as this topic's not going to go away in the near future or long-term future. And I can tell you, in the medical community, our COVID-19 discussions are changing every day, every week on treatment protocols. They initially told us to use hydroxychloroquine and avoid all steroid usage in these patients. Now they're telling us, don't you dare use hydroxychloroquine. And oh, by the way, you can use steroids during a certain period of time. It might actually be helpful. So that's how much things are changing in the medical field too. So, okay, let's move on to our next topic.
Brad, do we need to approve any of the expenditures, or because I know like the Chromebooks and stuff like that, I don't know if Bog is still part of this or if he's just streaming for us, but I assume the ordering of Chromebooks could take some time. So do we need to approve that tonight as well, if that's something we want to do?
Well, I think that was one
Those
of the
would
next
have
ones.
to be bidded.
Yeah,
So we'd have to bring those bids to the board for approval anyway. So
Yeah, I think that is going to be probably, those issues are probably going to be, have to be discussed at our next board meeting, because we got to discuss, going to hire new janitors, the Clorox machine, several other things I have written down here on the true guidelines.
Mhm.
I was planning on moving to the next board meeting because we need some time to look at those and decide where our budget's coming from. I'd like to get more of an in-depth analysis from Mitch as far as what money we have, where we could possibly come up with these funding. And so I think that's going to have to be, fortunately, our next board meeting is only in 2 weeks' time. We'll still have 5 weeks. So they'll be a little bit tight, but I think we can do it. I did see a couple things that had me concerned. One said that health safety guidelines, fourth box down in the middle, said you should take people's temperature when they walk in. If no temperature, they should be allowed to in without personal protective equipment. I think there was some mistypes there, and there's a couple other issues I was going to be sending out to administration to get clarification on before our meeting in 2 weeks' time. Is there anything else, Ms. Treva, Dr. Menard, that you think need to be discussed yet tonight by the board? We can't wait until our next regular meeting.
I think Jory's right. The big one there is the Chrome pads and Chromebooks, and Bog can get bids on those and have numbers for you at that meeting. Does that sound, I see you're popping back on, Bog. Does that work?
It works for me, but I would say it'd probably be 6 months to 9 months before we got anything.
They're that far behind.
Yeah, we just received today what we ordered. Was it in March or
Yeah.
April? We just received them today. So it's back. And they
So-
said they had those in stock, so.
Yeah, and we have talked about the option of taking some of our new Chromebooks and giving those to some of the younger kids, and having those kids that had the older Chromebooks that were due to retire, continue on with those until new ones came in. So we've talked about some different options that may get some Chromebooks in the hands of the kids that we need to get them into.
I'll
Any
try
other
to
issues?
find out more information by your board meeting in 2 weeks.
Any other issues that we need to talk about the return to learning plans?
Is there any
Yeah, we have-
consideration? Are there any considerations for like our 3 and 4-year-olds, preschool or additional associates, or concerns with them keeping their masks on? I mean, has that been thought of, or do you anticipate any issues there? Or is there a chance that preschool may not happen this year because of the concerns about the kids following the recommendations?
Yes.
Yes to all those questions.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I right now we have we had our BEAT program running with 4-year-olds and staff. We noticed significant changes in their behavior when adults were wearing masks. It's taken them a long time to be their normal selves with masks on around them. But DHS recommendations are they're definitely required not under the age of 2, and then they aren't requiring them for our younger students. They have gotten really, really good at washing their hands. They wash hands in between their centers. They wash hands when they change toys. They know how to socially distance and wait. But also our ratios are really good, so they have lots of space. Our numbers of kids were down, so the adult to student ratio was higher. I think also something to think about is we serve a lot of 3-year-olds that are able to come get services at our school due to their needs around their individual education plan. And so I would think that we couldn't walk away from serving those students that definitely need us in that mix. So I'm hoping that as we look at that hybrid model, we can be flexible about some of our littlest population. And I hope we can hear from parents what they're looking for and what they've seen with their students as well too. Even as I talk with other people, they're trying to figure out how to do that. Luckily, our preschool program is set up that we usually have a max of 16 kids in a classroom. So they're already kind of set up with smaller class sizes anyway. And it's half-day shifts. So because of that, it's already kind of set up in a way that might lend itself nicely to a hybrid when we know what our community is looking for in that a little bit more.
What if you go through all day perfectly with mass hand washing, and then you sit them down around a lunch table to eat lunch? Is it all wasted at that point, or is it plans?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Dr. Milhouse is definitely the expert on this, but when we were looking at exposure, when we had that with Kids Club, what they wanted, they were more concerned about was within 6 feet of the person that was infected for a prolonged period of 15 minutes. So we could wipe surfaces really, really well. Kids can wash their hands really, really well. We train that all the time with the littlest pumpkins, and they're good at it. But I think the tricky part is going to be that exposure. They don't always have personal space. They're really good at sneezing in your eyeballs. So, you know, some of those things we're going to have to be things that we talk about and figure out what to do. And right now preschool doesn't eat at school. And if they do, they eat in their classroom. But yeah, for older kids, the lunchroom is going to be a question for sure.
I think a couple of things on the.
Jeremy, I would just add that that's a concern for all of our elementary kids, what you outlined. I mean, we have trouble getting kids to keep their shoes on sometimes, let alone a mask over their face. So definitely a concern.
It's going to be a concern. I think a couple things here. I would suggest number one is that I believe recommendations are coming out that we may have to split our lunchroom hours up more and have a table for 6, just have 3 kids at it. And that type of thing. Also having more of the kids eating in their classrooms, carrying their trays back to their classrooms to eat, which is going to be a hassle. Those are a couple of recommendations I've seen come out of the state so far. Our preschool teachers, we might ultimately may have to have them having a little bit stronger masks as the N95s, which are a little bit shorter supply and they're kind of a more of a pain to wear. We wear them some at the hospital when we were dealing with COVID-19 patients or patients under anesthesia. But we might have to have those on, or even a hospital mask, because the hospital mask and the COVID and the hospital mask and the N95 mask, they not only protect the person wearing the mask from giving the virus to someone else, but they also prevent the virus from coming in toward the wearer. So the more advanced mask. So in the preschools, we may have to look at something like that, and perhaps at some of the elementary teachers, but the teachers are not going to enjoy that, because when I have to wear the N95 masks for a couple hours, it's not fun.
The teachers have also suggested the option of face shields, just because we teach sounds and so we teach them to look at their mouths. And so, you know, I think we're getting a lot of good ideas from a variety of people as well too, as we look at the hybrid model.
And there are some good studies coming out talking about the face masks being nearly as good as, the face shields being nearly as good as face masks for preventing a lot of the spread of the disease. So that indeed might be an alternative we'll have to look at. Those are a little bit better, easier to purchase if we have to have those. And some people wear both.
Autumn, can I just make a comment to Autumn? I've read some things about the little face shields too, and I saw that as a possibility. And so I,
Yeah.
we looked at it too, and it could maybe be.
And
be a
Becky
choice.
Rieger, Becky Rieger, our music teacher, actually has shared some articles with me that both Jill and I have read around just, the different option of that. And especially as we look at, we're teaching speech and language and vocabulary so much. And if they can't see our facial features, how incoming that will be for our students. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at that too as we.
Oh, very good. Very good.
One other issue that I've wondered about is going to be substitute teachers. It's always difficult, and we're seeing it with baseball and softball. The second you come in contact or possibly contact the 2 weeks quarantine, I think that's going to happen more and more as we get into school and get further down the road on this. Is there any? I mean, what are we doing with substitute?
And Jeremy, 2 of our most consistent substitutes at the elementary level got teaching jobs this year, and a third one is booked for 2 maternity leaves back to back through December. So that takes away 3 of our most consistent subs. I know, just at our level.
And we also our subs are teachers who may have some variety of concerns for being in the building.
Yep. And that's part of the hybrid plan. That's part of those details that you put together and looking at the different options and having fewer kids in the building at one time and that sort of thing. I just wanted to add too, we talked about face mask and Des Moines requiring it. Ankeny just voted tonight or just announced tonight that they would require masks for all employees and students as well. So that guidance that our local public health department is giving us is happening in other places as well.
Okay. Anything else? I will say one thing about teachers and exposures. There is something in all the COVID-19 as far as exposures, self-isolation. There is something that says that if you're considered a critical worker, you can work as long as you check your temperature twice a day and wear a mask and face shield at all times, and report to your supervisors and leave work immediately should you start developing any symptoms. And I would not be surprised at some point in time the teachers and associates may be considered critical workers, and we might be able to get by with that rule for some of the teachers that have been exposed and who are asymptomatic through the entire time. We do use it in the healthcare field quite a bit. There's a couple places that are not, but they have a lot more staff than most facilities do. Boone County, that is our rule that if they're asymptomatic and had an exposure, they check the temperatures twice a day. They wear a mask, face shield, but we're already doing that anyway. And report if they have symptoms and we send them home at that point in time. So other things to think about. So any other comments, concerns? Okay, then we'll move on to the second topic of the night. And that second topic is district equity efforts. Is Mrs. James on the, Jill, are you on here someplace?
I am.
Okay,
Evening.
good evening. I'm gonna turn this over to you first, and Dr. Menard, you can pitch in since Mrs. James is our equity officer. I'll let the two of you guys talk.
Yeah, we had talked as a leadership team earlier in June about the importance of equity efforts in our school district. And we had actually had some pretty serious discussions about this back in January and February as well. And had talked about putting together an equity committee and that sort of thing. And so when we talked about this in June, we thought that it was important, and the board also expressed interest in knowing what our current efforts had been and what the cultural environment of our schools were related to equity. And then down the road, hoping to put together an equity committee and also getting some sort of feedback from the community as well on the types of things they'd be looking at for equity efforts in our school district. And so this is kind of that first step. And let me introduce some people that are on here that we've invited to participate. Sierra Tiedemann from the high school, our art teacher. Heidi John, teacher at Page. Bradley Meyer, our family and consumer science teacher at the high school. Amy Pritchard, a Spanish teacher at the high school. Whitney Snyder, a fourth grade teacher at Franklin. Keith Lehman, eighth grade teacher at the middle school. Tasha Faulkner, who's a middle school associate. Olga Gonzalez, an associate at Franklin. Reggie Hurd, who is a custodian at the middle school. Justine Stevens, who is one of our family liaisons, along with Krista Reynolds, who is a family liaison, and then Megan McIntyre, a high school counselor. And so we invited them to come and just allow the board to ask some questions about equity, our current practices, where we're at, and have a variety of people answer not only what we do in our efforts, but things that they might see that we can improve on as well as we start to take a stronger look at some of our needs in the area of equity and our efforts that we are making in that area. So I would open it up, Jill, unless you have some comments, I'd open it up to the board to ask some questions, and I would open it up to that group that's on there to answer any questions that may come up. So Jill, anything you'd like to add?
I would just add that, from an equity standpoint, our equity work obviously begins and ends with our own learning and our professional learning with our staff, and continuing to use that professional development and professional learning as an opportunity to learn ourselves, as well as our curriculum review process, a time where we really look closely at our curriculum standards, as well as the materials that we're using to address those, and use an equitable lens with that. So when we look at the professional development over the last 10 years, the district has done much work around using a lens to think about students in poverty. Pam, I know when you were here, you helped lead a lot of that work and our efforts of working with students in poverty. And then we broadened that in 2015 with really using a broader lens to think about family engagement and ask ourselves the question, do we engage every family, and how do we do that? And how do we make sure that we're able to honor a wide variety of perspectives? And then I think that this equity work is really that next step in our professional learning, and really examining some implicit biases, examining our own critical consciousness, and thinking about what equity might look like from a variety of lenses. And that's really where we might need to go next. So, we have some pieces in place, but I think there's much improvement, and I welcome the input from the team that we have here.
And I would just add that over the years, the issues of equity have become more and more ingrained in our curriculum and part of our everyday work. I've had some questions related to equity from people in the community in the past, and I've said, our responsibility is to educate every child and give them the best education that we can give them. And that includes the culture in our buildings and how we work with our kids. So from our standpoint as educators, the ideal position of that is that every child receives the education that we want them to receive in a culture that we want them to feel comfortable and safe in a positive learning environment. So we work to do that. And yet we know that there are challenges throughout society, and our school only reflects our community and our nation. And we know that there's some troubling concerns out there right now that are valid. And so it's a good time for this discussion. So I'd ask the board, what questions do you have? And then I would offer an opportunity for any of those participating in the meeting to answer those from your perspective, to give an honest and fair answer of what you're experiencing on our school. Questions from the board?
I really feel like with this group of people, there's so many capable people there. And when you look at your materials that you use with students, we've always tried to look at that. I'm sure Jill has continued that effort whenever we go into the curriculum, like Brad said, and look at new materials. And if any of you have recommendation on materials, that's always a good thing. So it wasn't really a question, but it was a statement or a confirmation that I think you guys probably know how to deal with those issues curriculum wise.
Yes, there's a template, Pam, and I'm sure you had used something similar, or I know you use something similar too, that when curriculum teams are reviewing various materials, it asks them, to review the content, the instructional pieces that are involved. And then there's a large section, one of the largest, that it just has several questions related to multicultural and gender fair materials. And then it kind of steps, I think there's about 10 or 12 questions. I was just taking a look today in preparation to say, how many questions are there that just ask a variety of questions to consider a variety of lenses when we're looking at, say, new science materials or social studies materials or so on. I think that as we're working with teams, we can continue to prepare them to better answer some of those questions or consider some things with a different lens as they look at those questions. But the effort is there, and that is important to us to make sure that we continue to be able to do that.
I guess I would have one question. My question is for the principals at each of the buildings. Have you been aware in the last 2 or 3 years or 5 years or however long of any instances where students have not been treated fairly? That they have brought, they brought issues to the superintendent or to the principal or to you, Jill, or to the equity, whoever. Have there been any?
Pat, can I ask for clarification fairly?
Yeah.
Are you talking about in a cultural setting or by a member of faculty, or?
I'm talking about students.
Okay.
Student issues, with students.
By other students, Pat, or?
Other students, yeah, or by faculty.
Yes, in my 2 years, we've had some of those issues. We deal with them quickly and decisively, I think.
How do you deal with it? I guess that's my main question, is how have they been dealt with? And have they been dealt with effectively?
I think one of the things, I had a long conversation with Mr. Byam last week, and I think some of that perspective, which was why I invited the 3 people from our building that I did. I know Reggie's been here for a long time, but moved here from Chicago. And so has some good ideas that we discuss all the time and talk about different things in depth quite often. And Tasha Faulkner, growing up as a Boone student, coming through our Boone schools and now being an employee of the school district. And Keith Lehman's worked in Des Moines for 20 years. where we know as administrators, we've been going to a lot of the summits, and that's a lot of the things over the last 2 or 3 years that we've been able to participate in. So I think when you look at some of those ideas and what comes out there, I think it's kind of twofold. Like, I think we deal with it quickly and decisively. What me and Mr. Byam talked about was that the right way? You know, is punitive consequences versus, you know, the learning environment of what you do to create it. And so that was a discussion that we started last week. And Mr. Byam had visited and reached out and called a couple students from the past and talked about some of those issues that had come up. And I think what we sometimes fail to see in that implicit bias is we think we handled it appropriately. And then in talking to that person, maybe they didn't feel that was the case. And so, hey, what happened? We had this conversation. We called the parent. You know, maybe somebody was suspended for it. But then in talking to that student, we felt like, oh, we were swift. We handed down consequences. We met with parents. We did all these sorts of things. And then in the certain situation that me and Mr. Byam talked about, this student said in a situation, he was kind of made to feel in that quick, hey, you know, I think kind of like society, hey, shake hands and say you're sorry. And that takes place, but he was made to feel like we made him accept that that was okay by shaking that other person's hand and doing that. And we didn't perceive that. We thought we dealt with it. We thought it was how we handle things. And so we started a conversation of reaching out to some of those students to get some of those perspectives. And we started talking about, myself and Mrs. Newell this past week have been talking about what our processes are, what we put in place, how if a situation happens, rather than something punitive, like district-wide having a, you know, if this happens, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps that we're going to do. That may include punitive, it doesn't, but I think it needs to reach a level of understanding, listening to the other people, taking into account and getting what their perspective is. And what I think the most important part is listening to them to feel like what they need to feel supported in that situation. You know, maybe we have somebody shake hands and say you're sorry after step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have taken place. And maybe that's a series of, you have meetings with parents. Maybe that's a series of, we have you watch some videos and go through and talk about that implicit bias and what that means to other people. And then maybe later on down the road, when you can explain to that person that was harmed the process that you put into place to educate them, to put them in a better place. And now they would like to apologize to you because they feel they've been educated and learned something differently. I think just that process needs to be looked at and how we feel, you know. And I think sometimes the answer isn't like, you know, I think sometimes we might jump to, hey, somebody did this and you suspended, and that punitive damage doesn't make that person feel any better either. So I think that if we've had 100 situations, I'd say all 100 are different. And so I think having this community to talk about those things, what would be useful in that process, if we go through a series of ideas or steps that we want to take in those situations, what are some things we should include in those steps to make people feel like we're listening to them and supporting them.
Hey, Scott.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Just a second here. Heidi, I saw Heidi raise her hand first, so I'm going to go to her.
Okay, I just wanted to add, you know, our action plans that we want to take and our practices that we do as teachers, the curriculum changes, all of those things are very, very important. They're like stepping stones to get to our equity, you know, where we want to be. But where we drop those stepping stones is in human value. And that's like water, and it splashes on everything we do. And I think we need to, you know, as a school system, make sure that our human value system has solidarity. And so we will know exactly what to do, and a more of a a strong understanding of how the student feels. And I just feel like, you know, how do you get that solidarity? You get that through teacher education. And it needs to be a universal education. It needs to be, you know, strong. And it, you know, we value so much teachers having different perspectives, but this is one of the times where we need to have solidarity with this. So if that makes sense, I mean, what we teach is going to have integrity if we have the same human values. So that there needs to be no give and take with that. That's just how I feel.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Appreciate those comments. I heard someone else about ready to comment when I cut him off because of Heidi having her hand up. It's hard for me because I'm having to go through about 4 different screens here. So if you have a question, put your hand up and I'll keep coming back and forth here. Who else wanted to comment there?
Brian, if I could, I'd like to ask Olga, you have worked with a lot of the Hispanic families coming into our school district and been very supportive of us in those transitions. What are your experiences in relationship to their comfort level and their acceptance as they come into our school district?
Yes. Well, I've been part of the Boone community for over 17 years. And so my kids all started at Lincoln Elementary. And one of the things that I think back when my kids started at Lincoln was just the support of some of the teachers that my kids had in wanting to know who they were and what they liked and what they didn't like, and just asking questions about family, because family, I know for everyone in this meeting, is very important. And so that's kind of my my experience as a parent. And then there were some instances where there was some sort of issue with other students. And, you know, it had to do with race, ethnicity. And I feel like the administration, when I did talk to them about it, they listened and they really took care of what needed to be done. And I thought it was fair. Another thing is that usually the Hispanic families that have came to Boone and left Boone is there have been migrant families, migrant farm worker families that work, their parents work in the fields. They stay for a few months at Monsanto and that's what they do. And I feel like most of that is what we've done good is I think that Boone has done well in trying to bridge the language gap. We've done excellent in that. I mean, I feel like if the family needed interpretation or they needed someone to be there for conferences or any type of meeting, my experience with those families has been there has been contact made. One thing that I would kind of I want to say is that Boone, as a community school district, could do is just maybe have I don't know what the hiring process is, but just have like you know, they have family liaison, but have a Hispanic liaison for families that maybe that could be that point, you know, that contact to reach for whatever resource they might need. so that we can, so that we are able, as a district, to be able to meet that family's needs.
I love that.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you.
That's good. I want to say something, and maybe I'm going to say this on behalf of the board. I don't think I can say that. I'll say it on behalf of myself. I hope that everyone in this call right now feels the freedom to be honest with us. Like, we asked for this because we want to grow as a district. So if there are certain things that certain teachers have seen from some of our African-American students, or even those of you who are associates and custodians, like things you've experienced and seen, and where you see we can be better, we want to hear it. And so like, I want you to feel the freedom to be honest in this call right now. And if not, I pray that you can reach out to one of us later, reach out to your principal later, whoever it is, so we can start to work through some of the issues so that we can be better. I have several questions. I saw Brad Meyer had a question or had his hand raised. So
Okay.
I think Amy as well too, but yeah, I'll let some of you talk before I start asking my multitude of questions.
Okay, so let's go to Brad Meyer.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add a few things to some stuff that people said. So Scott was talking about behavior and things, and CASEL, which is who developed the social emotional learning standards that the state recently adopted, they highly recommend that as a staff, we are reviewing behavior data to see how situations were handled to ensure that they were handled equitably. And I think is a bigger point that I feel like as a teacher in this district, a lot of times I feel like there isn't a lot of clarity or openness about certain things. And so if I do send someone for something, I don't always know how that was handled. And I don't have any idea what sort of behavior issues are going on in other classrooms and how those are handled. So that was a big recommendation from CASEL, is that as a school, we should be reviewing that data to ensure, because we might think we're being equitable, but when we look at the big picture of 100 different cases of the same exact behavior, were they really handled equitably? Were students of color handled differently? How that was handled. So that was a big thing through them. And the CASEL in general and the SEL competencies that the state has adopted are really great, and they really encompass a lot of the issues of equity within those competencies, and figuring out how we're going to adopt those and implement those is going to be a key thing. And I think that is a big initiative, for us and PD and stuff next year. And I think that's really great. They have rubrics to assess our school, and it's a really, it's a good tool to help develop those skills. And that brings me to what Heidi was saying, is that I know for a fact that there are teachers in my building who don't believe, I grew up in Des Moines, and I'm a queer person, and I know there are teachers in my building who don't believe that I, as a queer person, should have the same rights as them. I know there are teachers in my building who don't support Black Lives Matter. And with social emotional learning and equity, we can't fix systemic issues without systemic change. And so just having people in our building who believe that is going to impede any effort we try to make, even if it's a single person. And you have to think, especially when we look at history, is such an important topic. And our students might only have one American history class their entire life. So ensuring that teacher and that curriculum especially is at the highest level possible is so important, because that's going to shape their views for the rest of their life, and maybe the only person that ever educates them on those issues. And we know, especially in today's climate, that how many things in history have been left out and I know, and I feel like teaching is very personal. And so we make decisions about teaching even subconsciously based on our personal beliefs, because it is personal, and there is no way to make teaching black and white, because we are going to teach from the heart and teach what we believe. So that's my big thing, was clarity, reviewing behavior data, and the only way to fix systemic issues is with systemic change. No amount of me or 5 teachers, or how most even teachers doing all they can do, is going to fix a wider systemic issue without that systemic change.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Brad, for your thoughts. Next, I think they said Amy wanted to talk. I'm going to guess it's Amy Pritchard, because that's the only Amy I see on here.
Hi, sorry,
Yep.
I picked up an assistant.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't know, piggybacking off of what people are saying. Like Heidi, I feel like as a staff, maybe it's just me as a high school staff, but I anticipate coming back to school, the kids, they've been exposed to everything we have and whatever's in the news. They've been watching TikToks. They've been getting a lot of new jokes and material that they're just going to come back ready to just let it roll, and I feel like I think there's already a lot of even like racial jokes that are somewhat going under the radar at our school, and kind of not. I think it's pretty rampant. Just from what I think kids that are disgusted by it, like that they tell me that they hear on a daily basis. Things that I've heard come out of kids' mouths in my own classroom that's just about knocked me over. That they don't understand why the N-word is bad, that that's happening, that they just don't get it. Or they're choosing not to, or it's coming, I don't know what it is. But I just think we have to come at it like 110%. I think our staff needs education. Like Heidi said, I think we have to have this common education with this is what's going on. This is what our students need. This is what we need to know to help our students, all of our students. And we need to start that now. We needed to start that, a long time ago, but now especially, I think we need that team training. I think the more that we can come together even before school starts and just have a plan of attack for, hey, if you hear this in your room, this is how you need to get after it, and you can't just let it blow over. I feel like, I guess I've had with some kind of racial instances in my room. I think of one really kind of dramatic instance that was awful, and the boy that it happened to just said, nobody cares, it doesn't matter, this happens all the time, nobody cares. And just that we need to know that they need to know that we do care and that we are doing stuff. I don't know what kind of training. I know I looked at, I've heard people take classes on Iowa Safe Schools, and I'd wondered about the possibility of even encouraging our staff to do that, or can we pay half of that for some of our staff? They have anti-discrimination. They've got LGBTQ classes, just something, or even if teachers would pay for it themselves, that they could then get out of a PD or something to encourage just our staff to learn more as much as we can and come together. I don't know, sorry, I'm rambling. I've got a lot going on, but I just feel like we as a staff need to do as much as we can even before school starts to be united. Even on the mask stuff, I mean, not just this. We need to, for each situation that we can possibly anticipate, just this has to be our solid response and not wishy-washy. I think we learned with the cell phone thing that wishy-washy doesn't work, and masks is just gonna be one more thing, the cell phones, oh, we can kind of do it like this, or we changed the last minute like this, and it works for some people, and it doesn't work for other people. The masks have to work. This racial, all of this stuff, we just need to figure out and be united. That's my take. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I was looking through here, and we have a lot of Boone High alum that are here on this talk tonight. And so I'd like to go through with the ones that I'm pretty sure are Boone High alum, and if you're not and I missed you, I apologize. You can kick in at the end. I'm just going to go back by my screens. I'm going to save our 2 school board members as the last 2 people. So just kind of some thoughts from them as far as if a couple episodes where they thought they experienced some inequities, and also one idea that they would, if there's one thing they could do to change what Boone Schools is doing, what would that thing be? I'm starting here. Tasha, you're the first one I see on the screen here that I know is a Boone High grad, other than Mr. Weber. And so I guess I'm going to start with you, Tasha, and then I'm going to work my way back up here.
Okay. As a Boone High grad, I mean, I was born and raised here, so I think my experience is a little different growing up with everyone and being raised with them. I did have a couple experiences where they handle correctly. You know, when you're 17, 18 years old, I don't know if you can say it's handled correctly or not. It's kind of depending on how you go about things and how you're raised. I think some things were washed under the tables and some things were handled correctly. As a teacher, I think Boone does a great job. I don't know what you could change to handle situations, but besides teaching everyone that everyone's equal and we all go through the same stuff, we all put shoes on the same way.
Okay.
That's really all I have.
Okay. I'm going to go back here. The next screen I see, I get Bog is on here. I believe aren't you a Boone High grad, Bog? Maybe he left us.
I think he stepped out.
Okay. Then I'm going to go back here.
I'm still here, but no.
Megan, Bog, you go ahead first, and then.
I didn't graduate. I married a graduate, though.
Okay. Sorry. Megan.
Yes, I'm a Boone High grad. For me, I feel like high school, a lot of things didn't get addressed that I was aware of. I wasn't really exposed to many things. I feel like my cultural awareness and just awareness of differences outside my life came from college. And I think that's just, I kind of was in a little bubble probably in high school more than anything. I do feel like there's more that could be done, kind of like Amy was saying. I think there's more we can be doing with our staff for training. I know Ames, my sister-in-law is teaching in Ames, and it seems like they've been doing a lot, and they have a diverse community, but I know she said it's really opened her up a lot working in that district, just how much more they do for teacher education. So I think there's more we can do, and I think there's more we can do with our students. We do little topics here or there through advisory at the high school level, but it's definitely not enough. I think there's more things that we could be exposing them to try to help. But I think some of it too is we're battling, a parental issue as well. There's probably education that needs to be happening, more outreach in our community as a whole. That's going to, we can only do so much with the kids. We can try, but there's messages they're receiving from home as well. So the community part, I think, is something we have a little bit of control of things we can offer, but I do think that sometimes is something we battle.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. The last page here. Let's see here. Drake, you weren't a grad, were you? You were just.
I was not.
Okay.
Nope.
Mr. Kelly, we've heard from you. Any other comments about something that happened to you when you were in high school or junior high?
I mean, I would say the same thing as Megan. I said, you come through in a small group and you kind of know what you know. And I would say, my, I guess, eye-opening experience as everybody's talking about education. Several years back, we attended the Climate and Culture Summit in Des Moines and listened to a speaker from Chicago that talked about implicit bias. And I remember sitting there thinking, she's talking about kids that we don't have. She's talking about problems we don't have. And it's probably one of the best sessions I've ever been to of all the things that I went to, and I learned the most from it. So I think that educational piece is not understanding that implicit bias and how we treat each other. And I think that's why I think we've done the best we do in certain situations, knowing what we know. But I think that training and education can put us in a different place.
Okay. Did I miss any other Boone grads except for our 2 school board members?
Can I add to that too? I'm a Boone grad,
Sure.
so that qualifies me. I like what Scott and Megan kind of mentioned. I would also say that I was kind of in a bubble too, but I think maybe that is something that we can kind of actively help to get rid of. You know, I think that's part of the problem, is that like people like us have just been able to live in this own little bubble of oblivion. And I think we need to do better for our next generations and help get rid of those bubbles and to open their eyes to what the world really is and to other people's experiences. And I think maybe that should be like a goal of ours for our students, is to help them leave our district with just a better understanding of the world and how it works and people outside of their bubble. I would also, I heard earlier too about wanting to hear kids' voices too. And Drake Bailey and I have talked a couple times last year, and we just didn't make it happen. I think it was supposed to be spearheaded by me, but we talked about putting out some sort of survey, at least at the high school level, on kids' experiences with just kind of what they hear on a day-to-day basis. Like how often do you hear these sort of things? Have you ever not want to come to school because of how people treat you based on whatever? Because I feel like, I know we've had like student experiences where like a student's own friends wouldn't stop with racial stuff and he didn't want to come to school anymore. And have we lost other kids based on that sort of thing? So it's some sort of like, how do we hear from them? What are you experiencing? How can we do better for you? I think would be good.
Okay, now I'll let your husband talk.
Justine.
Jeremy?
Justine Stevens is also a Boone graduate. So let
Oh,
her
are
talk.
you? I didn't realize that.
Yep.
Okay, Justine, we'll start with you. We'll go for you to first.
Yes, I am also a Boone grad, 2012, woohoo. So one of the biggest inequities growing up that I noticed was just the difference of like socioeconomics across the district and how staff and even students would kind of discriminate those who had the lesser of the socioeconomic side of things and kind of oppress them for not having all of the things that everybody else had. So that was a big thing I noticed as a student. One of the big things I noticed as a staff is staff oppressing the children with behaviors and kind of painting a picture for them and not really allowing the child to have their way or their say, and the staff kind of paved the way for the child with the behavior.
Okay, thank you, Justine, and now Jeremy.
I think a lot of good things have been said. I think about two sides of an mention this, that there's outside influences, you know, politics, whatever, that maybe come from home. One that Myers mentioned was that, you know, when they get to American history, that's critical that they have, you know, sound instruction there. I would argue that if there's implicit bias present, probably pretty well set in by that point. You know, I would say we need to, here's to react to the culture that exists, but we need to train our students to change that culture as young as possible. You know, a 3- to 4-year-old are capable of learning about empathy and all kinds of things in our school. So if we get implemented there to help train kids to start changing the culture so that we don't have to react to that culture in 10 or 15 years, I think that would be money well spent or time well spent to do that.
Okay, thank you. Joey.
Okay. So I don't know if everyone saw it. I know all the board did. It got forwarded on to us. One of my good friends from high school actually wrote a post on Blackout Tuesday, and he perfectly put into words exactly what I've been wrestling with for 20 some years. I mean, I'm not going to read it all for you, but if anyone would like to see it, like it's great. It's from Nathan Malice. If anyone hasn't seen it, I'd be willing to send it to you later on. I know the board has seen it. I know most of the administrators have seen it. And just, I'll say this too. Like I made the joke with Chris and Scott and Brad the other day of like, I learned about social justice from Tupac Shakur and Notorious B.I.G., not from my history teachers. And that's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's reality. Like, we don't learn about this stuff in Boone. And until I got to DMAC, and you know, you had this mentality of like, oh, well, Boone is 93% Caucasian, so it's not an issue for us. Well, that's not okay. It doesn't matter if we live in a diverse community or not. Even if it's 1%, this is the reality of the world around us. And so, like, I got to DMAC, and all of a sudden, my world was flipped upside down because the entire DMAC basketball team was African American, and the baseball team was Hispanic and from Canada. And all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, this is what the real world looks like. And it was in my own backyard. But I had never heard of any of that. You know, I heard Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but I had never heard that he euthanized an entire continent or an entire country. And I'll tell you, like, even as a parent, I'm shocked by some of the things that my children are learning still in 2020. My son is still coming home learning about Christopher Columbus, and my son did his own fair share of educating of what Columbus really did in a classroom. So we need to be asking those questions of like, what does history class look like from a small child? It's not enough to just plaster an MLK quote on the wall and never talk about him. And you know, we may talk about the civil rights movement, but do we talk about the Reconstruction era? And so those are the kind of, I know I may be further down the line than some people want to be, but I think there may be a happy medium of like where we are and where I think we need to be, and somewhere in between. I absolutely think our teachers, I want to know, like, what does personal development look like in the areas of implicit bias and white fragility and how to be an anti-racist, and just some of these conversations that are going on that are so vitally important for our teachers. I want to know that our teachers are receiving this training. You know, I want to hear that, yeah, I want to hear that my son is taught about Stonewall. Even as a Christian child, this is part of American history, and he needs to know that this is part of our history. And I think it needs to start young. I think it starts small and in some areas, you know, like we've talked about when a Black child walks into a classroom, what does it look like for him to be surrounded by 24 white children, and all the pictures on the wall are all the white presidents? You know, thankfully we have a Black president we can slide on that board too, but there's so many incredible men of Black men and women of history that need to be taught to our children at a very young age. And so, yeah, I just think you guys, those that talked about the history aspect, I think that's so vitally important. And yeah, I know that, like Justine said, and maybe Jeremy said it as well too, of just like, yeah, Amy said it, of like, no, Megan, I'm sorry, mixing everyone together now, but like, I know with some people, they're gonna go home and hear the opposite. We can't change that. We can't necessarily change the parents. The only thing we can do is change the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joy. Now I was looking through here, and there's a few people that I don't think we've heard from tonight. Reggie, we've not heard from you, and you're saying you got a lot of experience from outside this community coming in. I'm interested in hearing your perspective about what you've seen since you've come in here and ideas for change, improvements. I'm going to start with you, and then I've got, we haven't heard from Brett Collins, Mr. Lehman, Mrs. Tripa, Mitch, we haven't heard from your opinion. And I believe, I don't know if I've heard from Mrs. Newell tonight. So we're gonna start with Reggie and work our way back on my camera here.
Well, I've got two students that's in the middle school. They've had experiences there, but what I've seen in the town has been different. We got some friendly people and some people that's not so friendly. But I deal with things in a different manner, so I don't see all of those things as such as black and white or racial or anything like that. I look at it in a different light, so that don't bother me. But there has been some issues where my kids were called some names, and they were addressed, and then we were able to talk about it and know that this kid wasn't taught or that kid wasn't taught the things that they should have been taught as coming up. But other issues with kids is sometimes kids just need to be heard. There's been issues with kids, and I've talked to them myself, and they right away correct themselves, and then calm down and able to go through their day. So I mean, racial is not my thing, but behavior with the child, I've had experiences in the school building as well as with my own kids. They just want to be heard sometimes. And I believe if they could bring to the school a class to teach the adults how to deal with manners of coming with kids, that'd be great.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mr. Collins, you're the next one I see on my screen. You've had some experiences growing up at Valley, Norwalk. What's your experience been here?
I think with related to the topics that we're discussing, growing up in West Des Moines as a Valley graduate, the diversity was very low when I was going through school, and that's changed in dynamics quite a bit since. Really, my experiences with people that didn't look like me or that weren't like-minded in a lot of ways or like experienced happened, being with my father who coached at Des Moines East, coached basketball there, or my parents who were both special education teachers in Des Moines. So, having to go outside of my community to actually have those experiences and interactions with others that didn't see the world the way that I did. Saw some of that once I got into college, kind of like what Mrs. McIntyre shared too. And so it's a lot of learning and a lot of trying to be aware and understanding different people's perspectives on life. And of course, that's changed and shaped me a lot, and try to do a lot of listening with my background as a counselor. And, it's tough. I think our kids need to have those experiences and have that awareness, especially in communities where you don't have a lot of that difference. And how do you facilitate that for them? I'm not smart enough to know that, but I think it's definitely a conversation we need to continue to have, and needing to make sure that we identify when a situation is not right and it's not appropriate, or we have an interaction between our students that they don't fully understand. We need to take that as an opportunity for them to learn from that and know that, that's not something we're going to stand for. That's not something that we're going to allow or take from our kids. Maybe they haven't had that learning or conversation before. So I think for me, I enjoy listening to everybody that shared this evening and knowing that I can continue to learn myself. So, I think we're all in a position and all involved in education because we want to continue to learn and help others and help our young people start to see a bigger world. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Collins. I'm going to go down to Ms. Newell. Mrs. Newell, she's on the next one down on my screen.
Yeah, thank you.
The majority of my years are from Des Moines Public Schools, at North High School, East High School, and Lincoln. So I would say coming to Boone, definitely, I would say that the students, majority of them, know what they know. And, hearing from other alumni that, said they lived in a little bubble, I would agree with that. That a lot of the students, when there is a situation, it's because they're not educated. And it truly is a learning opportunity, and especially at the middle school level. So, I look forward to, moving forward and coming up with more of a protocol to let the victim be heard and come up with what they feel like would be a good outcome, a positive outcome, so that they can feel safe and they can feel welcomed, and know that we have their back. And so I look forward to kind of coming up with more of a process for that. And then giving, the aggressor a learning opportunity and give them a chance to grow from it. Because, when you know better, you do better. So.
Okay, thank you. And let's see here. Autumn, you got your hand up.
I was raising my hand really nicely, waiting my turn.
Yeah.
We learned that in kindergarten. I think so. I come from a different background as well. I grew up in California, moved to Iowa when I was 14. Definitely grew up in poverty, so different, angles all around. And then luckily, my master's degree was actually through Dr. Spikes at Iowa State, who's led a lot of the work, and Katie Swalwell, that Ames has done over the last couple of years, as well as talking with colleagues from, Ames and other districts that have done that critical conscious training. I think we're on the right path to what that looks like. But I think, we can talk about these things that we know are happening. I don't think I think rarely people go into this with malintent. I think we talk a lot about how the lens that which you see things through. Well, some people have never thought about what their lens is ever. And so I think that's our job, is to help educators, students, families, our community think about what their lens is and think about that in a safe space. Dr. Spikes talks a lot about calling people in instead of calling people out. That can be our role as a school system. We think about the three things that make huge change: churches, schools, and prisons. Those are the huge things. We're one of those, and so we have a lot of responsibility in that to start having those conversations and allow people a place to figure out what their lens is and wrestle with that. Because I think if we come in and we say we're gonna change everything and history is now new, well, history is not now new, but people who won wars get to tell their story, and it isn't always an accurate story. And so I think now is a time for us to start with, how do we help our staff? How do we help our community find their lens at which they see the world, which in turn helps us see our implicit bias. And then we can create our critical conscious to go through that. And there are lots of great resources out there. And I think everybody that has spoken to this, like, it starts early. There are social justice standards that look kindergarten through 12, and it starts off really young with every family is different. This is what my family looks like, or even this is who I am and I'm proud of who I am, with self-portraits and naming it and naming ways that I'm alike and different. And I think fear plays into so many of the scary things that happen in our world. And so the more that we can have that conversation with students, just like Joey and many of others have said, is, we can't change everything a child experiences, but if we get them thinking about themselves and we give them opportunities to talk about things that may be uncomfortable in a safe space and have a comfortable response. Heidi even mentioned that as a staff, we need to make sure we know how to respond. We need to make sure that we all agree on what's non-negotiable about how we treat other humans. And we need to teach kids that. They need to see that with us every single day. But we haven't had time to talk about that or learn about that. And there's amazing facilitators. There's multiple all around us that can facilitate that conversation for us. And guide us as an outside person that will really help us call others in and think about that. Think about our lens, think about our implicit biases, think about just why we believe the story we tell, and let others tell their story and teach us, because we have so much room to grow in that. And I think nowhere else you're going to find a place like educators who care about that and want to change the world for good that, you know, that you will hear. And I think we have a great opportunity to do that. And I think luckily, not luckily, you know, the climate in which we're currently in puts a focus on that. And, you know, I can see a lot of people in our district wanting to be part of that change, part of that, that team that leads us through that. And that's what a lot of other districts have done too. They started with people that were allies for the change that was happening. And then slowly more people started joining and they started educating and calling more in. And that's a really intentional way. I mean, Scott's already modeling that. Chris is already modeling that by going back and reflecting, what could we do better next time, and remove that ownership and just go for learning. I think we're at a great place to do all of that. So I'm excited, and I feel like the board will continue to support our work on that as we move forward as a district.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Mr. Lehman be next, and Mrs. Schneider, you're on deck.
I just have a lot of notes written down of things that other people have said, so I'm going to kind of skip around and jump around to some different topics. When I was in Des Moines, one of the things that the Des Moines Education Association did is they offered us to take an Iowa Safe Schools class, and they actually reimbursed us to get license renewal for that. So when we were talking earlier about Iowa Safe Schools, I've taken a couple of those for license renewal. You can take them from grad classes as well. So to incentivize that, I think the two that I took were very positive and kind of eye-opening to me to kind of look at things a little differently. So I do recommend the Iowa Safe Schools. When I was in Des Moines, I taught at Brody Middle School, which is on the south side, right next to Wakanda Country Club. So when I was there, I had country club families, and then I also had students from low-income housing. And so the one thing that I think is huge in Boone, and somebody already mentioned the low SES, is we've got to make sure that we're touching on all of those kids who don't necessarily have the real life experiences, or the experiences they're getting are being forced upon them by somebody else. You know, there are kids in Boone who, quite honestly, you know, a trip to Des Moines is eye-opening to them. And so we've got to make sure that those experiences are given to everybody, and not just those who can afford to do that. I think Joey talked a little bit about giving kids a voice. One of the positives of teaching language arts is writing is a easy way for kids to express who they are and what they're feeling. And so that was one of the things that, you know, and we've got to also, and somebody mentioned this too, we've got to be open to those tough discussions. I had a student who turned in a very well-written narrative essay, and it was about her experience in a different situation. And it was a tough experience. And she was a little hesitant to share those things. And so I think as a staff, we have to encourage those discussions, and we have to make sure that those students feel comfortable, or have somebody in the building that they feel comfortable sharing those experiences with.
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Schneider, you're next, and then I believe Mr. Bailey, you're on deck.
Okay, well, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of some of the other comments because I agree with a lot of these. I really agree with what April said about we got to have a united front. We need to be consistent district-wide, pre-K-12. We need to have a common message for our families, our students, and be one. I also agree with what Megan said. I think education for teachers, families is really important. I've been hearing all about book studies, and your staff needs to read this. You need to discuss this. I'd love to be educated more on it because we all have bias. We all need educated, no matter how much we think we know. It's really important. Joey was talking about history classes, and I teach social studies, so I think a lot about, and when Juneteenth came around, I was like, I need to learn a little bit more about that. And I'm like, why did we never learn about this? How is this flown by all these years? But, you know, I graduated with 38 people in a tiny little school. I think we were kind of that bubble again, and there's so much we don't know. And so I think education is key, and listening. Yes, listening, being there. So I agree with also what Brad Meyer said about clarity and openness. It's really important. So I don't have anything new. I just agree with a lot of what has been said.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Schneider. Mr. Bailey, you're next, and then Mr. Byam, you're playing cleanup. I think you're the last one, other than we're gonna let our new superintendent to be in 36 hours. We're gonna let her have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot new to add from what everyone's talked about. Just that I kind of agree with your message and what's going on. And just my background was kind of, you only know what you know, and your perspective is reality. Coming from Bondurant, not very diverse. It wasn't until college where I was kind of pushed and uncomfortable and vulnerable is where I really showed my growth. My role, kind of piggyback off Jamie, is dealing with behaviors, just trying to let those students have a voice. And not really taking a punitive approach anymore with students, and just really listening to them and making sure they're heard, and then using that opportunity to be educated. Because like I said, I only knew what I knew, and my perspective was reality. So really challenging kids' thinking when they do make a mistake, because we all make mistakes, and pushing them on why they think that. And often not, it's kind of like what Megan said, it comes from home. And just pushing their thinking on that, and helping them grow. And hopefully when you help grow kids individually, it'll kind of sink into your culture and change systemically.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Byam, I think I saw you were still on here. Maybe.
He may have slipped away. He had a baseball game tonight. He's coaching his young son's ball team.
Okay. Okay. Mrs. Tripa.
I think there were maybe a few others, but maybe they didn't have anything to say. Was
Okay,
there?
who else did not?
One
Anyone
thing I
else?
would say, Brian, this is Krista, so I'm the family liaison at the middle school in Franklin. But one thing, I think students want to be heard. I work a lot with a lot of students that will come in with like LGBTQ concerns. And like in middle school, they're confused in general of what's going on, and then you add identity things on top of it, and even like the Iowa Safe School stuff, I've given students that information too. So that's a resource that not only for teachers but for students as well to be a part of, but just giving them a voice, and and not being afraid to ask them questions. In my office I have like a trifold of things with like race, identity, gender, and it's amazing how many kids will pick it up and ask questions. And then I'll ask them questions because I don't know what they're experiencing, and not being afraid to ask them. I think sometimes the adults get kind of stuck that they don't know the answer to what a kid's going to say, so they don't ask the question. So just teaching teachers to ask those hard questions, because they're already thinking about an answer. So, and that's coming also from more of a clinical lens too. So like working in therapy and in clinic settings too, is you have to be ready and prepared for those answers, but it's okay to ask them and not have an answer back. I think sometimes we want to give an answer back to kids, and sometimes it's okay to say, I have no idea. So just kind of feeling comfortable in that uncertainty.
Okay. I'm looking through here. Sierra, have we heard from you?
No, not yet. I can speak next.
Okay. You're the next one then.
Thank you. So I also have a bunch of notes that are kind of like little non sequiturs that I'll try to make them comprehensible, I guess, or comprehensible, whatever. So one thing that Bradley talked about was clarity, and I've just been thinking a lot about how I believe that equity most likely can really grow with transparency. I'm not sure that equity can exist without like really radical transparency. And so one thing that he talked about was like making sure that we could possibly analyze behavior data as a staff team. And that would be awesome, because I would love to be able to advocate for my students if that's necessary. And I'm not saying that it is, but yeah, so I think equity with transparency. One thing that I was thinking about with implicit bias, there was actually a study done, and I couldn't tell you exactly when. And basically some teachers sat down and were asked to watch this video of elementary students. and identify a behavior, but the kind of like the trick was that there wasn't a behavior, but there was eye movement tracking going on that they didn't know about. And when they were told to look for poor behavior, their eyes immediately went to the Black students in the video. So there are biases that we have that we're not even aware of in little things, like even like our eye movement. Like when I'm looking around my classroom, am I being good about watching everyone, or is my bias making me watch one kind of student way more than another? And of course, I'm going to find behavior when I'm watching them more than my other students. So I think talking about implicit biases, teacher training is really a great idea. And then the whole idea of starting them young. One thing I've been thinking a lot about while we've been talking is if we take an inventory, for example, of the elementary classroom library, what are the percentages of the characters in those books? Are they white kids? Are they largely animals? Are there any are there any families of color? Are there any people of color? Are there any LGBTQ characters in these books? We have to start them young. There has to be exposure. That's going to cause, it's going to lead to this systemic change, excuse me. I'm in the high school and I can't exactly change their thinking at that level. I can advocate for things that maybe they haven't heard before, or I can hold them accountable to things that they say, kind of like Amy was talking about, that are not good. But it's really challenging to maybe change the way that they think if we don't start that young. So I think that would be something to think about too. Like, can we think about our curriculum even in the ratios of the characters in our books? Okay, that was a lot. Hopefully that was something new, but those are kind of my jumbled thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I apologize. I'm trying to get through. I've got 4 different screens I'm having to go back and forth through. So if I miss someone, it's not intentional, but I'm trying to flip back and forth here. Right now, I've got down the 4 people that I have not heard from. Jill talked a little bit earlier. Pam and Pat, we've not heard much from the 2 of you, and Mrs. Tripa, we've not heard from you. I'll go with Mrs. Tripa next, and then I'll let the 2 school board members comment. I'm trying to get this wrapped up by 8:30. We've had a lot of good thoughts and a lot of good conversation, and I think this is just a starting point. And so I'm gonna hear some comments from these 3 ladies, and then I'll make some closing comments.
Okay, well, thank you. And what I would probably just comment on is how exciting it is for me to see that this community is open to the conversation to begin with, because I've definitely been a part of communities where this kind of conversation would not have occurred. So while this might have been maybe a baby step for us, I think you need to give yourselves at least some acknowledgement for the fact that at least you're open to the conversation. I think also something we need to consider is that as a board, an equity policy is something that needs to be taken seriously and should be well thought out. But I think as a system, we need to incorporate equity into our strategic plan. And the portrait of a graduate that I spoke about when I was interviewing, I think a portrait of a graduate is about essentially saying these are the components that every child will be able to be guaranteed by going through the Boone school system. And if we feel as strongly as I'm hearing that equity is important to us, then it needs to be part of that portrait of a graduate. So that's how I'm seeing that fit in as we move forward. I'm really excited because the topic of equity has been a very, we've had very candid conversations in the national cohort that I belong to. And I feel that just as Autumn referenced, there are a lot of fantastic resources at our disposal that we need to take advantage of. And so I'm just excited that we'll be able to embark on this journey and in a cohesive manner, because we've got a lot of people on this call, and this is just a representation of our school community and our community at large. So I'm excited to start this process is probably what I would say. And just for those of you that don't know me, I also grew up in Bubble. I grew up in a very small school, very heterogeneous community. And I would say while college opened my eyes, teaching opened my eyes the most. I taught in Davenport schools in middle school, both special education and general education in the mid 90s when there was a lot of racial tension in the Quad Cities. And partially because some of the gang activity that was coming down from Chicago at the time. So it was a time frame of a lot of learning for everyone. But for those of us that grew up in those bubbles, it was quite the learning curve. So I think that to Joey's point, you don't have to be racially diverse to have equity conversations, because it's not just racial equity, it's the socioeconomic inequities that exist. There are a lot of different equality and equity issues that we need to discuss. But obviously in the news with the racial inequities, that's going to be at the forefront of our minds right now. But like I said, I'm just excited that the community is open to the conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Nystrom, we'll go with you.
Well, I've been in the district a very long time. And as I look back at some of the things that we have done, Nate Monson from Iowa Safe Schools gave in-service for us, a half-day in-service for us several years ago, which was really the first time some staff probably had thought very much about issues of the LGBTQ population, and they've expanded since then. I had one person who I would have never guessed come up to me afterwards and tell me that he was so glad to have sat through that. And I won't share who that is, and he's not in the district anymore, but he was a high school teacher with a coaching position, and that was heartwarming to hear that. So I know people are eager to learn. I kept thinking about the presentation that Amber and everybody did on what they do to promote behavior change at school. Not Amber, Autumn. Autumn presented what they're doing, and Brad talked about what he's doing up at Franklin. And, you know, we need to keep that momentum going if we're going to have systemic change, attitude change. You know, Heidi talks about everybody being on the same page. That's really hard, Heidi, for everybody to be on the same page. But as kids see everybody be on the same page and be consistent and know what the expectations are, you can keep that rolling for a very long time. And so we got goals that we could set up. Thanks for this few minutes. I think that our district has a lot to offer, and we can make a lot of changes, and we can create an atmosphere that is for everyone. I just have to say, I didn't know. It'll make me cry. I didn't know. I knew what Juneteenth was. I didn't know it took 2.5 years for everyone to be free. I didn't know about the massacre in Tulsa. Those are things I wish I would have known. I grew up in Jefferson, Iowa. I barely got to talk about Martin Luther King. I graduated and lived through all of those events. So I want our kids to know. I want our kids to know a lot and to be well-rounded. And even if you don't hear it at home, you'll know that at school it's okay and it's a good place to be. So sorry I get a little verklempt. Autumn can appreciate that, I hope. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Nystrom. Mrs. Teben, I'm going to go to you next.
Okay, not sure where to start. I guess I'm a firm believer of what you are is where you were when. Kind of remembering, if you kind of look back, I'm not saying how old I am, but I am a 70s child. So I kind of grew up in that era when that was all make love, not war type thing. So I came from a different viewpoint. Even though I grew up in Iowa, I came from a different viewpoint just there because of that. Most of my teaching career was at DMAC. We moved to California when the kids were very, very, very little and lived there for 4 years, and then Texas for 4 years, which I think adjusted them and made them realize, because we were in very, very diverse neighborhoods in both places. What I think we really have to do is not only work with our young kids, because that's so essential that we hit them early on, but also that we try to somehow work with the families to help the families understand and not, I know we're not going to reach every family. We know we can't reach every family. There's no way we can do that. But if we can somehow start getting families to understand, I think we'll be in a better place. Because again, what you are is where you were when.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Mr. Weber had a quick 30-second comment he'd like to make, so we'll give him the floor for a quick comment.
I'll give credit to where credit's due. So Mr. Winter has been texting me a little bit here and there. And he brought up a really good point that fortunately, everyone on this call is on the side of equity. But we live in a community that isn't always. And I think, I think Pat touched on that a little bit right now. And so a lot of the students that you guys are interacting with, they have trained behaviors because of their parents and the community and the government and the political world that we live in right now. So we can hope to change the hearts of the students, but yeah, we can try to reach the parents, and that'll be the harder aspect of this.
Yes, I would agree with that statement. It's ultimately the parents we need to be able to reach, because there's some learned behaviors that come from home that we only have so much control over. I'll just make a couple closing comments. I too, I'm a rural Iowa kid. 49 kids in our high school class. The closest thing we came to diversity was our German foreign exchange student my senior year. College, I was at Luther College. Again, not the most diverse school. We had several African Americans, but percentage-wise, not as much. Medical school, more percentage of African Americans in my class than when I was in undergrad, because there weren't too many biology majors of minority. So learned more there. Practicing in residency in inner city South Bend, Indiana. No, I was not next to Notre Dame. We like to joke that we took care of the visiting team in the inner city because we were the non-Catholic hospital. So it's been a learning experience. My daughter, when she heard I was leading this discussion, my younger daughter, who's the sociology major at Grinnell College, goes, "What in the world's the old white guy leading this discussion?" Because he's not going to know anything about diversity. So I'll admit it's still an eye-opening experience every day. I have to lean back to residency days, and then I practiced in Des Moines for 3 years, where again I worked with a larger minority population. So I think we've had some great discussions tonight. I'd like to thank Mrs. James, Dr. Menard, for arranging for all of our panel members here. We could go on for another 2 hours, but I know all of us would like to get some sleep and spend some time with our families yet tonight. I would like to thank Dr. Menard for all he's done. This will be his last official board meeting leading us. And we'd like to thank him for all of his years of service and wish him well in his retirement out in Colorado. And as far as the equity issue goes, I think our next thing in talking with Ms. James is we're going to try to put some of this together on paper, some of these comments, and the board look at some of them. Next thing we'd like to have is more of a community dialogue about equity, where we get several of the people on here and maybe some other recent alumni, some minority students, some who've gone off to colleges and have had different experiences in colleges. As many of you Boone alumni said, that Boone still is kind of a microcosm. You don't experience nearly as much here in our school district as you do once you get out on the college life. Having more of an open forum, invite all the community members, see if we can get some involvement from our Chamber of Commerce and city officials too, with something either in the month of July or in early August. That being said, are there any other comments? I've gotten a couple comments here from members here, thanking everyone else for being a part. They feel that had some good discussions. Anyone else want to say anything? I'll give you guys 30 seconds to unmute and say anything you want to before I adjourn this meeting.
Thanks to all the staff. You guys are great.
I would echo that. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting tonight? Or do we want to keep going for another 2 hours?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? There's motion by Mr. Weber and seconded by Dr. Nystrom to adjourn this meeting tonight. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Again, I would like to thank all of you for spending the 2 hours tonight. I think we got a very good start on this handle and this issue. I'm hoping that we had a lot of viewers on our YouTube check in and out. So we got an idea of where the community has an idea of where the school would like to go on this issue. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.